And welcome to this seventh session of the United Nations Greater Lincolnshire Challenge Seminars. We had advertised this as a session run by Shane Trail, who's the Director of First Media. Unfortunately, he's not able to be with us tonight. We are running this as the trustees and others to put onto the framework of our website and to other places a debate and a roundtable discussion around closing the digital divide. Okay, Bert, shall we start the PowerPoint? Okay, if we can go to the second screen. If you look at the, as I have done fairly recently, some of the news headlines, that's this month, July 2021, in Maryland, United States, a long piece of work about the importance of local digital literacy. There's one of the most advanced countries in the world, yet in Maryland in the United States, they're talking about how they put literacy, digital literacy programs in to close the digital divide. I worked in education for many years, and certainly in the early days of getting adult literacy, computer literacy, we used to run programs called Computers for the Illiterate or Computers for the Confused. And certainly both the how you use them and what you do with them was quite fascinating. I certainly observed one session when the tutor said, move the mouse to the top of the screen, and the person picked the mouse up off the table, the computer mouse, and lifted it in the air. So when we talk about literacy, it's also about the technology that's alongside the software and the usage of the packages that are on there. In Barcelona, they've decided to flood one low-income neighborhood with technology and training and resources to get their residents up to speed. That's 15th of July. Again, talking about Spain and the issues in Spain, they see a low-income neighborhood. And I think in the context of post-COVID or during COVID, it's highlighted the issues around what is or is not happening with families and young people in poor areas where they do not have access to learning through computers or access to computers for other aspects of their life. The next title there, the 50% of Latin America has less than 50% has fixed broadband. They have some mobile broadband, but fixed broadband is more stable, and it also means it's located. Those who have non-fixed broadband largely pay for it through a huge charge through 3G or 4G. A statement there, why fairness needs to be hardwired into future tech policy. That's the United Nations statement that says, look, if you're seeking to get progression and development happening and sustainable development, then if you do not have fairness, you're going to leave people behind. No access means no progress for many people. Improving digital infrastructure and access to devices and the internet is important. In eradicating the digital divide is critical for women and the rural population of Africa. 17th of July. We'll look at a moment in the future about the dispersion of access to 3G, and you'll see that there is far more concentration on the developed and affluent world than there is in other parts of the world. Next slide, please. In 1953, year I was born, apparently there were 53 kilobytes of high-speed RAM on planet Earth. I remember watching Apollo 11 as it approached the moon and landed, and the first man on the moon. I believe there were 36 kilobytes of RAM on that machine or that endeavor to get to the moon. When I was working and writing to my parents in 1977, they worked in Sudan. We used to write on a flimsy piece of paper and post it. We used to send it with information about what we might be doing in 3 weeks' time. so that when it arrived, they would read it and realize what we were doing. This was in Juba in South Sudan. Because now, in terms of changes, we pick the phone up now and speak face to face on WhatsApp or whatever in real time. In 2004, I was in a project in Southern Cape, Eastern Cape, South Africa. And with a dongle, which I had borrowed, I accessed the internet with my computer in a village where they had no running water and had only had electricity for 2 months. And there, unbelievably, the teachers in the program I was involved with, I was able to show them 2 million pages of information on Nelson Mandela on the web. And the hoots of delight and joy and amazement was very real. In 2021, I'm sitting in my office with 16 million kilobytes of RAM, 16 gig of RAM on my desk. Technology has exponentially changed our lives. And my digital journey is witness to that. Next slide, please, Bert. As I said, the dispersion of access to 3G, the 3G coverage in 2014 is the red elements, 3G expansion from 14 to 2017. You can see the dispersion around the world, and of course, without access to 3G and the work that goes on with that, there is the whole removal of opportunity to live and work and develop in the world in which the affluent countries operate. So if we are seeking to change something and give people a chance and close a divide, which is a very real one, something has to happen around access to internet facilities. Next slide, please, Bert. When we think about dimensions of technology and aspects of technology for the internet or other forms of technology, we can talk about how they affect parts of our world, in our social world, to do with how we live as people, how we engage, how we develop as people, in our legal areas in terms of the legislative frameworks that might or might not exist, in terms of the economic, the trading and the finance world, in the political world and the influences and the dialogues and the misinformation, as well as the communications agendas, and certainly in the technological world around how we live, how we eat, how we house ourselves, and how we move about in our world and in our living. I want to call upon those here just to think about their experiences with some relatively strong expertise in our group to consider how these aspects show dimensions of a divide. Can I call upon Bert to start?
Thanks, Clive. As you may remember from my previous presentation I did for the group, which was around sort of security and that aspect of the SDGs, the political and the legal aspects of this are something that are of interest to me. And what we are tending to see around the world is that some of the big geopolitical fault lines that exist between the United States and Russia and China, those types of fault lines are actually playing out in the field of technology as well. And the development and regulation of technology is becoming an area in which there is tension and disagreement between the various power blocks around the world. And one of the growing concerns is that the global discussions on the future of technology are actually becoming less inclusive and representative of the world population. The Secretary General of the United Nations has actually developed a roadmap for digital cooperation. And the work that has underpinned that is really quite interesting. He convened a high-level panel on digital cooperation about 3 years ago. And one of the things I find interesting was it was co-chaired by Melinda Gates from the Microsoft Foundation and Jack Ma, the Chinese entrepreneur who leads Alibaba. in the Chinese sphere. And from the work of that group, they published a report in June 2019 called The Age of Digital Interdependence. And that has led eventually to the UN Secretary General's roadmap. And he's identified about 8 key areas for action. Now, the two that sort of met with my interests in all of this was one of the key areas for action was how we ensure the protection of human rights in the digital era. And all the existing human rights conventions that the world is using were all written, really after the end of the Second World War and beyond, but not in the digital era. And there is very much a view that they need to be updated now to remain relevant. And also a big part of it was how we promote trust and security for people in that digital environment. Around this, one of the things that technology in the digital world is great for is actually as providing a means to exercise your human rights. But what we find is too often that digital space has actually been used as a means for violating people's human rights. And the view of the United Nations is that regulatory frameworks and legislation around the digital world should absolutely have human rights at the center of their development. And the types of things that the UN want to have a look at are data protection rules, digital identification in the digital space, the use of surveillance technology, online harassment, and content governance in the digital space, all identified in the report as being areas of particular concern. Again, I think the United Nations would very much say that human rights exist online as much as they do in the offline world. So that's again something that people are going to have to give a little bit of thought to as we go forward. Just a couple of little things that I picked up. I mentioned there online harassment. Some research that was done over the last couple of years has identified that women and girls are 27 times more likely to be harassed online than men. And coming behind women as a group are then groups involved in human rights, environmental activism, journalists, and activists in the LGBT sphere. And the types of things that are routinely being seen, and I use the word harassment as a term, but they actually go beyond that to death threats and threats of sexual and gender-based violence being used quite routinely against people in that online space. And the world is yet really to catch up with some of that. Another area that's sort of very current and very relevant is the whole issue of surveillance technologies. And if anyone has been taking and reading The Guardian over the last couple of weeks, you may have seen the extensive reporting on what's become known as the Pegasus Project. And that's a group of organizations around the world, including Amnesty, who became aware of a data leak from an Israeli company called NSO, who developed surveillance software. And the investigative reporting seems to have identified that potentially many world leaders and politicians have been subject to intrusive surveillance using the software products produced by NSO. And I think Emmanuel Macron actually contacted the new Israeli Prime Minister last week to ask for a high-level probe into the use of this software and how it is being developed. So those couple of things, Clive, I think just give a little bit of taste of the magnitude and some of the issues that are going on in this space at the minute.
Thank you, Bert. I think bringing to the fore the fact that we live in a legal and political framework in a developed and democratic world, but of course there are millions, billions of people living in other settings where news and information is shared differently for different purposes. And certainly
sorry, Clive, a great example that has come up again is the digital space is a fantastic environment for very rapidly moving information and getting it into the right hands. But taking COVID as an example, we've also seen evidence of the digital platforms being used as a means of providing disinformation. And one of the challenges that exists for governments, organizations, and society going forward is how they carefully manage misinformation and information that is likely to lead to harm in a way that doesn't involve blanket closing down of websites or even internet access in some societies. And that's a real challenge that people are going to have to deal with going forward.
Yes, I guess it comes down to something like what you might call accountable freedoms.
Yeah.
That you can be liable for the outcomes of your words and actions, as well as in real life, as well as through the internet.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Bert. Can I ask someone else to pick up things? Is Clifford there or Mark there?
Yeah, on the sort of technology side, of course, there's a huge divide in terms of the infrastructure in many countries, particularly the third world country, just simply isn't there to be able to afford those people any reasonable communications or indeed access to internet sites that we can. To me, it's one of the biggest concerns I think there is. If we're looking at a global, we are looking at a global economy, then it seems that people have to have access to the technology in terms of equipment, which of course many countries don't have. And then you've got to have a useful and worthwhile infrastructure to deliver, whether it's the website, broadband, or whatever. So I think there are some really big inequalities that need solving, not just on a local, regional UK, but also on an international basis. It's clear that through the United Nations embracing the business sectors, the community sectors, the education sectors, these people throughout the world need to know so much more in terms of basic information. I'm not talking about anything too advanced here, just health and well-being information. It could be simple things just in communicational senses. So unless we really look into those areas, I think there's going to be a lot of catching up to be done. Even in the UK, certain regions suffer, rural localities, we're not far off that, suffer because there's lack of broadband. And you spoke earlier on, Clive, about the 3G, 4G technologies. It seems that we as a country are even behind, because already these technologies are in the US and other places. So they've got economic advantages in terms of the business users have got that ability to move a lot quicker in many cases than we have here. So, to me, the technology is a critical area that I think we need to really pay close attention to and try to help people understand that we could, by getting the right infrastructure in place and the technology, they can communicate and be, better people within the world economics, the world community. I noticed one thing Bert said on the technological side, and it's a concern, but I do think it needs bringing up, and because we have a number of problems when it comes to the social platforms, and relatively speaking, this is a global problem. It isn't a UK problem, but there are huge inequalities in terms of these platforms, Bert stole my words, because I was going to look at false information that's obviously spread, and the media is very good at doing this to me, and I think that's a worry, and it's a concern that needs to be addressed. I also think people are using some of the technology for the wrong reasons, and again, we need to look at um, legal opportunities to prevent those things, because they often do put people off using technology when they've got access to it. So I think generally speaking, there needs to be a lot more monitoring and a lot more control of all of the social platforms, particularly as young people tend to be influenced greatly. The great opportunity of that technology is that they have access, they can be a part of it, but it's the platform providers that we need to make sure act as responsible gatekeepers, or else that information, misinformation, or indeed harm and damage and the wrong sort of videos, images get through to people that really shouldn't have access to it.
Okay, thank you, Mark. I don't know if you're referring to this, but I know that Clifford and Janice are involved with a Global Biotechnology Transfer Foundation. Now, I don't know if you're able to talk about that, or within any of the context around technological transfer in terms of this aspect. Is that Clifford?
Yeah,
Janice?
well, I mean, clearly the digital divide is really an economic divide. If you look at the map of Africa, the two countries that have access are Nigeria and South Africa, which are the biggest economies in Africa. Getting technology across is a major thing to be able to cure the economic divide. What most developing countries are missing is the opportunity in technology to motivate their own economies. And the COP26 meetings in November hopefully will start to address this, because the Western world will want the developing world to change their energy habits, but they will have to provide the technology, and digitally is the way to be able to do it. In fact, obviously I'm not an educational expert, but the amount of information that's now available on the web in terms of education, being able to just Google something and look it up is just extraordinary. And the context of that in terms of responsible teaching, I would imagine is an enormous subject now that's growing by the day. The other thing I've noticed on the political side is the increasing use of the digital world to spread false information. And unfortunately, the developed world is actually leading in that. I think we only have sort of 6 media organizations now, and they're using it quite effectively to affect elections and political outcomes. Lord knows what will happen when less moderated countries have that opportunity. And I know certainly I wasn't allowed to use a BlackBerry in Saudi Arabia because the authorities there couldn't snoop on what I was saying because the servers were in Canada. And just last week, all the internet was switched off in Ethiopia, which has happened to me a couple of times there because they were having an election, having some serious outcomes with tribal divides. So it's a massive subject going forward.
I think just picking up on Cliff, what you just said there, and I think it is key. I mean, we mustn't look for all the faults with technology itself, or indeed the content, because I think Cliff said it. At the moment, you could almost argue there's information overload. We ask for a piece of information and get 100 sites, not 1 or 2. It's hundreds, and the art is learning how to decipher the correct bits. So that's a learning process. We also spoke, particularly with GBTF and ourselves. We are involved in knowledge sharing through technology. That's a good use of that technology to share best practice, and that goes on worldwide. So we're involved in that. And another great thing is that at least technology gives the ability for free speech for literally everybody. And again, we can't deny people that right. I think some of the fascination of YouTube and blogs and images is that those people have got a platform to deliver that, and all it needs to be done is it moderated by the platform owners in the appropriate manner. And I think nobody can deny the how important the technology is, particularly within this COVID area, where 99% of us, I'm sure, have used Zoom and indeed, other computer-based technologies to communicate across the world. And these are all positive. So although there is some negatives, we've got to try to make sure that the safeguards around the use of and the education of people using the technologies needs to be improved, so that we get good information that's certainly usable against across education and across health and well-being and all of those sort of sectors that do matter to people. So as I say, I don't really want to be too negative about things, but we've all got a part to play in this.
Just,
I got a ding then. Don't know who that was.
Yeah, just to echo what Mark was saying. I mean, behind me, we're putting together this aquaponics training unit, and we're trying to engage now with some local firms. And one of the facilities we want to install in it is the ability to collect data, so the students can actually see what's going on, and that information can be passed across the world to improve food security, food nutritional quality, health, etc. So yeah, I would certainly echo that. But I would also point out that even President Obama had a bit of a snoop at Angela Merkel. And of all the people, I would have expected him to be involved in that or running a government that would. So it has to be really watched very, very carefully how this fantastic technology is used.
Thank you, Cliff, and thank you, Mark. In terms of if you pick up the economic one, we'll look at the social one in the end, because that's about how we live together, I guess. I was talking today with someone about buying and selling shares. I don't engage in that, but this person was, and we were talking about how the algorithms in the stock markets, in the computers, which automatically buy and sell shares, can actually be better because they are quicker. And if you know a millisecond before another person what's happening to the change in the share price, then gains can be made. And so there are massive amounts of technology development around speed of computers and speed of transfer of information between banking sectors and share sectors. And it just made me think that at every level, there is an interesting little moment going on where those who are skilled and those who have access to the skills of changing things can be all the time changing things to make things better for somebody. Now, in the economic world, if you think about all the aspects about work and life and production of all the things we use, and then trade of those, then there's a tie-up with both the information technology we're talking about, the digital technology we're talking about, but also the product technology we're talking about, which is part of that. And so whether it's being able to build something, a medical piece of equipment or some medical device with a laser-built machine controlled by a computer, or whether it's built through the process of using an injection molding machine in a remote place in any part of the world, there are massive benefits in terms of how technology and the world of health and work and play can be advanced. The challenge in that is that the ownership of those technologies gains a reward. So there's a balance between those who own the technology and the rewards, and we see the massive rewards going to technology companies. Yeah, they are perhaps the new oil companies of the world, because they own and they are able to export their products all around the world easily, but at the same time gain an income from it. So the ownership of the technology also creates a divide in the wealth held in parts of the world. And I guess it's the same when you go to all other parts of the world in developing or less developed countries, where there will be those who are part of that game of development and gaining rewards, and those who are at the other end. In terms of the social and perhaps even the educational aspects about this, there's a huge thing we've all talked about there about growing skills. I don't know if Jane has anything to say on that in terms of the social aspect of technology.
Well, I do really. One of the things that I think has become fairly apparent in the COVID situation with schools is the need for remote learning. And I think one of the things that had been successful because of funding and the efforts that had gone into closing the gaps, we were seeing gaps narrowing and disadvantaged pupils having much better outcomes because of the extra support that they've been given. And I think what has been quite sad is to see that these are children who perhaps come from homes where they don't have the technology to be able to engage fully with the remote learning. And so therefore the gaps that have been closing have started to widen again. And I think this is a considerable concern, not for all the reasons that you've been mentioning up to now, but also because one of those gaps is actual literacy, not just digital literacy. And we know that if you have poor levels of actual literacy, the ability to access things digitally is impaired, because a computer can't be sympathetic to spelling mistakes, for example. So, we're talking about practicalities at what appears to be quite a low level, aren't we? And so for me, that's quite a concern. And I think if we're not careful, that the disadvantaged young people in first world countries are going to find themselves in a situation which is not that different from their counterparts in places that we wouldn't think were comparable because of that lack. However, the education process is still a really important thing, I feel, because in order to be able to sift information and understand it and be able to work out whether it is actually misinformation or harmful and know what to do to avoid it. It's all there in the curriculum, but if a big section of the learning community is not able to access that, then it puts them in harm's way. And I think when you think about the technology as a force for good, the potential is massive, isn't it? But if we're not careful, the very people that it is there to support and help will find themselves slipping through a net somewhere along the way.
I agree,
Thank you, Jane.
It's interesting, Jane, because even to today we've been working on a fund. It's obviously a crisis fund that the government's put out, which is all aimed at younger families and those in receipt of benefits at school. And I'm hoping that we can help those in a technological way, because I think you're right. Quite often there's only one PC between the whole family, and then it can be restricted or not available at all. And yet the young people right now need to have access. We know there's a lot of barriers to it. We know there's a lot of education, but if they haven't, not only are they at disadvantages in terms of information, it affects their health. There's lots of good, solid research and data that proves that without that access, they are going to significantly have an impact on their health and well-being through lack of information. And one of the other things, in a technological sense, that I hope we can champion, and I know that it's happening in other parts of the UK, is the use of technology to share information to people that are socially isolated, and that can be nature-based videos, blogs, things that they wouldn't normally have access to. So it's a huge issue we've got to try and tackle, or the government has got to tackle, and allow as many people as possible, and certainly those that are disadvantaged, either young people, young families that are economically disadvantaged. We need to pay particular attention, I believe, to those.
Thank you, Mark. I was going to say, now we can perhaps go from our own experiences to a wider picture. If you go to the next slide, Bert, we have a link to a piece at the bottom there done by UN Deputy Secretary Amina Mohammed, who was speaking on the digital divide and inequality. Amina Mohammed was actually born in Liverpool, but from a Nigerian family, and has been a significant champion in Nigeria and with the UN on humanitarian issues. Will that link work, Bert? Amina Mohammed on the 22nd of April was speaking at the UN Assembly, and her again we'll put onto there's a link there that you can actually pick up yourselves on from this video, but it was the assembly where they were talking about the digital divide and talking about the extent to which internationally, around all the issues we've been raising tonight amongst ourselves, these are the conversations being held in many countries around the world where there is access to the facility to have that debate. And what she was pointing out was that if we do not, as an international community, take this on board, then incrementally there will be more left behind. And in leaving people behind, the outcome from that is both an economic behind, because you can't trade. If you are not part of a digital community, for example, and you are involved in tourism, how do you get people from other parts of the world to trade with you if they're using technology for their spending activities? If you're part of a part of the world which is trading in raw materials, how do you look at the quality assurance and control issues if you can't access for yourselves the quality assurance and trade issues around exporting or producing products? So there's an economic agenda in that's very important for an outcome for having fallen behind with the digital and technological communities. In terms of the security issues, she raises the issues again, as we have raised here, around information and access to information, and how shaping of opinions can cause international dilemmas very rapidly. And for example, the COVID agenda has highlighted significantly the differences between nation states and how they've responded, and how they've allowed people to move or not move, shut down or not shut down, and how they have protected or not protected their populations. And as a result of that, the disease has moved from country to country. It requires a whole international agenda to bring a salvation and resolve to those issues. That's the general thrust of what she was saying. It's a very good video to pick up, and it obviously identifies that the UN is very keen to see the digital divide being addressed in a very specific way.
Could I just point out, Amina, I know she was born in Liverpool, but she's actually a Nigerian diplomat.
That's right.
She was the Minister of the Environment. Yeah.
Yes,
so,
yes. Yeah. I think her dad called her back to
Yeah.
Nigeria when she was about 21, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Next slide, Bert. If I go out and think around technology, whether it's a product I buy for the house, a product I buy for my business, a product I buy as a toy for my children, a product I buy in all sorts of ways, it's a product. If it goes wrong, it's a bad product. And when it goes wrong, you have an issue. So technology for me, and we've described this being as a great servant, but in fact, not being able to use it, access it, engage with it, it becomes a poor master. And so you think about purchasing something, the on cost of running it, if it's digital, the security and safety issues around it, the skills to use it. We've evidenced that tonight. We have a Zoom meeting where you can't access a video we want to show. And it's in how we sort out difficulties at the end. So we are living in a world which is rapidly changing for all of us, and yet you are still learning. And if we have to learn new things, the question is, how can we do it? So the question I was putting rhetorically is that if you think about your family, your peer group, the organizations you work or operate through, they have a view of digital technology. Do they embrace it? Do they skill you with it? Do they provide opportunity for you to use it? Do you work from home and have the right facilities to work from home with it? Are you cramped in a kitchen, sat on a kitchen table, trying to work with a laptop in a poor environment? Are you a family and a peer group in a developing country where you might be able to access information intermittently because the power supply or other things don't work properly? There are massive issues around the technology stuff. It's about the response to it that counts. The next slide, please, Bert. So what are the foreseeable challenges and what are the potential fixes? If we are about change and new thinking and new action, which is the strapline for our group in Lincolnshire, new thinking and new action. So the foreseeable challenges, I think we've identified. There are economic challenges, political challenges, legal challenges, social challenges, and technological challenges. Not only do all these things impact on our living and our livelihood as individuals in our communities and families, but the impact between us. And so what I experience and how I decide things will be influencing others. So if we talk about a potential fix and we move things forward, Bert. The fixes that have been suggested, certainly Amina, when she was talking, talked about the requirement for governmental commitment. That's governmental at the highest level to international cooperation for regulation of individual users and commercial behaviours. So the aspect that they are picked up in the first instance is how on earth do we find ways of collaborating to agree a framework that allows access, engagement, and benefits from the technology that's emerging and will emerge consistently down the line. The second one was about fiscal and investment incentives at local, regional, national, and international level to promote the infrastructure and access to all. So the first one's about behaviours and how you deal with the behaviours. I think Bert referred to those in terms of certainly the governmental and the legal and the political agendas. But it's about then the investment to allow those things to be available for as many people as possible, in whichever framework that is. And there's an onus perhaps between the commercial organisations to liberate access and funds for those who are in the areas of which they trade. If you think about working down the supply chains of any company or any product and working that to the far end, then where is the responsibility from the raw materials that's extracted right the way through to the final product that's traded? And certainly as we move from economies growing between primary producers to manufacturing to tertiary economies and quaternary economies, when we're talking about large numbers of people looking at entertainment and holidays and access to moving across countries and moving across international boundaries, if you don't have the infrastructure and the capacity to be safe in doing that with the data and information, then it inhibits growth and development. And lastly on that list there, education and training for all and all ages. This isn't something that can be related just to the children at school or the children at moving through to 18 or 21, because the technology will change, and the people who are older in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s and 80s will all need ways in which they can develop skills to take on new technology in an appropriate way. So there were the three things, the three fixes that have been suggested from the United Nations and also from other organizations that are interested in doing this. There are people out there trying to make differences, and we are hoping that our conversations tonight have illuminated some of those things and allow us to say, well, at the individual level, at a community level, at a regional level, we can start to think differently to make a difference. Thank you very much for taking part tonight, team, and I hope that our next session, which is on June, oh no, we miss August, so our next session is the 28th of September, and it's about sustainable energy production. Thank you all.